that you're all here for today, which is to talk about the spending review and its impact on culture, and I suppose a little bit more broadly as well. And we have Professor Becca Riley from the University of Birmingham and City-REDI. So let me just find you and make you co-host. Oh. You are co-host and free to share, Beck, if you would like to share slides, or you don't have to either. So we've got a room full of people really excited.
There we go. Can people see my slides? Let's just put them on.
Yeah, I can.
Are they in full? Are they in full screen? That's the.
No. So they're in normal view. So that's it. Now they're in full screen.
Yeah. So apologies for that. I changed my password at the weekend and nothing is working now. I've come in the office. It doesn't like it. So in terms of spending review, then I've done a bit of a review of what was in it, and also picking up some of the industrial strategy announcements. But I've also had a look at what people have said about it so far. No, it's not moving on. There we go. As is always the way with spending review, and also sort of the announcements around it, quite often there's a bit of a process of re-announcement. So there was the Arts Everywhere Fund was pointed to in terms of the 270 million, which is aimed at arts venues, museums, etc. And it's designed to ensure access to arts and culture across the UK, particularly in underserved areas. And also, I think the good thing is reasserting that the cultural sector is a growth engine for the nation, and that creative industries contribute 124 billion to the UK economy and support just 2/3 of a million jobs. Good thing is it's recognised as one of the key sectors in the industrial strategy, highlighting that role in economic regeneration and social cohesion. This is a good move for the sector because it highlights the sector across, alongside advanced manufacturing technology, etc., which is important actually in terms of the sector's culture and creative impact. So the industrial strategy, there is 380 million in new funding, 200 million for creative clusters outside London, 25 million for new Createch R&D labs. Again, I'm not quite with these things. You're never quite sure what's a re-announcement, because we do have a Createch one in the West Midlands, and 135 million for screen music and video games growth packages. A lot of these things have yet to be defined and details published. There is a policy shift, as I said, and that long-term vision for the creative cultural sectors. And the UK wants to be a global leader in it by 2035, which isn't actually that far off, with an emphasis on supporting creators through copyright reform, public service, etc., and international cultural exchange. So building those cultural collaborations internationally is going to be a big focus going forward. And it acknowledges the past underinvestment and aims to correct it with that long-term targeted support. DCMS view. So Lisa and Andy highlighted it's a return to the vision of arts for everyone, everywhere, echoing the original white paper. And it aims to break down those barriers to opportunity and boost local pride through cultural investment. So we're seeing again that importance of investing in our cultural assets to enable local communities to engage more, to feel more sort of part of their place, and also to help them have pride in their area because they understand that there's investment going into their local cultural assets. There is an emphasis on job protection, creative skills development, and regional access to culture. And again, the evidence coming out of DCMS is reinforcing that the role of culture in economic drivers and future growth. So what have people said generally? And this is where we start to get into some of the issues with what's been announced, I think. But analysts know that this is actually that paradigm shift. So it's I suppose going back to the importance of cultural investment, which was actually a big theme under sort of place-based structures like regional development agencies, which had very big budgets for cultural investment, where as an ex-RDA person, in RDA times, it was seen as a way of boosting reputation, boosting foreign investment, boosting sort of business investment as well, and attracting high-quality skilled people. So we're going back to that, and also that more distributed model of culture and creative is for everybody, not just for the people that can afford it. There is this focus on regional equity, and the broader creative skills development is seen as a way to sort of decentralise opportunity from London, etc., out. So setting up creative cultural assets in local places helps us to create inclusive growth. There's also a recognition of the need to adapt technological change. So there's a lot of overlap there with what's coming out of DCIT around AI. And I think the other important thing as well is, as Creative UK have pointed out, that 95% of businesses in the creative cultural sector are SMEs. So there is welcome news that the British Business Bank will receive an uplift in their investment, which then they can invest in more SMEs in this sort of activity. So what's been the general commentary on this? I think one of the issues is the cuts. So although there's been a lot of announcements that say we want to do things with creative and cultural sector, we want to invest in it, actually, at the same time, most departments, including DCMS, have taken cuts. So there is a sort of a dichotomy about what's being said in policy terms and actually the funding that is flowing. And that's sort of the problem is that government budgets are finite. However, if you're not investing in the things that will give you growth, then you're cutting off future income for government because you're not funding the growth now. So that means, as Paul Fleming has said, it creates a very confused picture about investment in the arts and culture, and also in terms of how it will be perceived and what will actually happen. And actually the announcements of real-term cuts to the culture department in the spending review, yet we're saying we're going to put more money in. So that's been the general flavour of the commentary back on regarding this sector. There is also the issue of AI being both a positive and a negative, in that how are we controlling how AI companies use our creative and cultural content, and how they use it within their business structures. The select committee chair has also highlighted that there's unanswered questions about how DCMS will manage their cuts, and also support the sector. And Royal Shakespeare Company has highlighted, I think, for the sector, is that these cuts might create significant challenges on how you can deliver for audiences and young people's learning if it's not aligned to other activities in other departments. So the big risks, as I've said, all departments have to find 5% efficiency savings. and which may strain resources. And just to sort of further emphasise that, the failure of the welfare reform bill means that, and we've had a couple of meetings now cancelled this week with central government departments, because now they've got to work out how do they find the savings that process was going to create by within the departments, because they were going to save money under the welfare reform bill. Now they're not, so actually these cuts might be even greater. But we've yet to see what will happen as a result of that failure of the bill. The DCMS administration budget is cut by 15% by 2030. So that's a shrinking of the department staff. That can mean that there's less space and time for them to interact with cultural organisations, and their priorities can shift depending on who's there in the department. There are also operational funding cuts, as I said before. The 1.2% is on resource spending, and there's also a capital spending cut of 2.8% over the review period. So that creates a lot of sort of churn and change. Again, another story of cuts really within the department. And there is also uncertainty about the ongoing review of the arm's length bodies, which will include many cultural institutions. So the welfare reform will affect all of those things depending on what they decide to do and how they decide to do it. I mean, the welfare reform changes wouldn't have come in until sort of next year, or started to come in. So it might be okay at the moment, but it might be in future years where those sorts of things kick in. So some general conclusions, and I'm happy to take some questions. The spending review and industrial strategy is seen as a mixed bag really for culture and the creative industries. There's been a big shift and a big focus on R&D and innovation. It's worth as well thinking about where that money's gone and whether culture and creative industries can benefit from that. So, for instance, the local policy innovation fund, local partnership innovation fund, the LPIF, which means that there is 30 million. 30 million will be available for the combined authority, universities and local partners to define projects. Within that, they want to build on strengths and assets that are already there, and to really accelerate growth. So that might be an opportunity, particularly for the West Midlands, given there will be 30 million. And there is also, for those outside the West Midlands Combined Authority, there will also be another competitive pot that you can put ideas to directly to UKRI, which again, given the culture, creative industries are highlighted in the industrial strategy as a growth sector, then actually there's opportunities there to bid into that. But in general, the long-term impact of these policies remains to be seen. And actually now, since the industrial strategy and the welfare reform bill, we still don't really know how that will peter out through the government. As I said before, there is this contradiction between government's rhetoric about the creative cultural sector and the actual cuts to funding in the arts and business support, etc., in this area, and also DCMS and the activities that they do. So it's government is saying this is great, it's really important, but actually the funding still isn't there. Now, to some extent, that's no different to anything else because they've got the same problem across the board. They're having to cut everything. I think the difference is that there's been sort of chronic underfunding in the culture creative sector over a number of years. So the gap is worse for this sector than it is in other sectors. There is also generally a concern, I think, around, it's good that it's being recognised in terms of its economic growth impact, but also it may overshadow the importance of culture and the arts for their own sake. And I think that's one of the issues that we battle with, is that arts and culture have a much broader role within society, about creating good places to live with great assets, with great opportunities for growth and well-being, and generally the creative mind, which is going to be in more demand in the future as AI comes in, having the sort of critical, creative mind that is born from having a holistic sort of education and access to a broad range of stimulus, is going to be an issue if we're not investing in that in terms of the future generations. And it is a problem, I think, into the future if we're not doing that, and if all we're seeing is the economic growth. And I say that as somebody who's dealt with economic growth most of my career. However, I do have a degree in fine art as well, so I'm sort of at a bit of a personal crossroads in this one. But I do think, you create rounded individuals by having a rounded education and access to a wide range of opportunities to develop your creative side, and that is going to be even more important as technology knocks out a lot of the activities that might be perceived as sort of essential in a lot of roles. That the readjusting and restructuring of job roles is going to go more towards critical thinking. It's going to go more towards the personal connection with people, and arts and culture are essential for that, from my point of view. And I think that's it. Let's hope that stops sharing.
There's a couple of questions in the chat, and also David, you have your hand up. Do you want to go first, and then I'll go through the chat conversations?
Thank you very much, Erica. Hi, Beck. That was really interesting. Certainly chimes with everything I've heard from the Culture Forward network, and what you see like on the national stage anyway, in terms of the contradictions and the confusion and the lack of clarity, really.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think how to frame this as a question, but I think obviously speaking from a university perspective, like yourself as well with higher education, the paradigm shift towards the government's push towards shifting cultural, creative, heritage art sectors towards focusing on aspects that can deliver and illustrate regional and therefore national economic growth. I could see the value in that. What the disjoint I can see then from the higher education sector, and consequently for the rest of the education sector, is 20-25 years worth of STEM focus, which I would say has been massive over focus in many respects because of successive governments who have not perceived the cultural creative sectors as being income generating, despite the fact they generate billions and billions in income. And that has never been recognised for reasons which there could be another whole talk about. I wondered from your perspective around whether you had heard from regional or national policymakers whether they have recognised this disparity, and whether there are going to be whether there is anything coming where they might want to work with the higher education sector and the education sector around redressing that balance, that long-standing imbalance, and look at investing in humanities, arts and social sciences to help create the talent pipelines that will be needed to sustain economic growth in the future.
Yeah. I mentioned the LPIF, which is the big funding that everybody's talking about. What I would say is at the moment, there's still lots of discussions about what the process will be to identify the priorities and the investments. I would say that the UKRI will be delivering guidance soon on that programme. They are expecting a triple helix approach, so business, universities and the local combined authority and local authorities to come together with a plan. I am trying to get them to think about co-produced programs. We'll see whether I'll sort of enable that to be established. UKRI is interested in investing in successful things that are already underway. And I think the fact that we have got CreaTech and that this sector is highlighted in the industrial strategy is an opportunity that we shouldn't miss. But however, what will be prioritised in that process, I can't sort of control. And they haven't actually identified the governance structure as yet. And I wouldn't have expected them to. It's the same boat everywhere. And I think the opportunity as well to collaborate outside the combined authority, where some of our assets sit outside, things like the City of Craft that's happening, what's happening in Stratford, etc. These are good assets that we could actually be thinking about. How do we invest in them? And not just as cultural assets locally, but also in that international frame of reference, which, when you think of, when you add up the employment, the tourism, the attraction of funding, etc., it's an opportunity that I think we should take that has yet to be sort of be realised. And I think there is a role for this group and all the organisations on it to lobby and make sure that the investment does go that way, and to help shape a collaborative project between universities that can help it.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David. I've got a couple of other questions in the chat. One from Jane: why has the government made it so complicated? Do you think this is deliberate? And you can choose not to answer that one. Claire is asking if we could have the slides, which I'm hoping we'll check in. Richard has asked if there are any further thoughts on the international cultural exchange. So, Richard, I don't know if you want to add to that question. I can see you there on the screen.
Hi, morning, Lister. Thanks for the presentations. Great. It was just really, is that you talked a little bit like the craft identity, etc., and international profile. But are you thinking, when it says about international culture exchange, that there are the pathways for that? Sort of like fiscal pathways, academic pathways, organisational, industrial, employment. Which ways might it go?
I mean, on one level, I'm not quite sure, because I'm not sure that they've actually released anything yet on that. I'll have a look when I get off the call, actually, just to make sure, because there is a lot of things in the industrial strategy that there isn't the detail of what this means and how it will be applied. I always think with these sorts of things, though, if it's something that we are interested in as a place, that actually we probably should be getting on the front foot and talking to them about it and defining what it is, so that it meets some of our what we envisage as a good thing to do. And I would always advocate for that, and I'm happy to help in that way. If we can identify who's holding the pen on these things is the important thing. Finding the person in central government that's holding the pen, that can be, going back to the why has government made it so complicated, that can be difficult in its own right, finding the person that's doing that. And I suppose the other thing is what do they mean by cultural exchange? Although it's an opportunity, it might be much narrow focus. I think seeing if we can find out more about that would be something that we could do. I mean, I think from my point of view, I think there is always opportunity to learn from other places, especially where they've looked at the transformation of places. How have places transformed perceptions? And Birmingham, West Midlands could do with quite a bit of that, to be honest. And how have other cities, how have other places done that? particularly through culture and the perception of place. And I think there's lots of opportunities to learn from other cities that have turned around and transformed themselves. And that cultural exchange is where we learn we learn about that process and what was in place there. I'm an advisor on an OECD program on leadership and transformation of place. And that's quite interesting in terms of what's coming out of that. And there's a whole lot about the perception and how you present yourself to the world and what assets you promote. And like I said in the presentation, RDAs used to have budgets for doing this.
Yeah.
So I think maybe is thinking about what we would want out of that sort of process and what we need to know would be the starting point, and then who's actually got the funding and writing the policy on this.
And just in terms of like kind of return on investment, I mean, do you think are we likely to go down a route of kind of 20% investment to create a full-time job, or I mean like actual formulas like the old European formulas?
I don't know. I mean, at the moment there isn't a formula-based approach. So if you take the LPIF, it's just 30 million per combined authority, and there's a big difference between the West Midlands Combined Authority or Manchester Combined Authority and Tees Valley. So they're not using that sort of allocation model at the moment.
Okay.
They're more seeing it as a level playing field. I don't particularly think that's useful, but I'm not the pen holder.
No. I'm sorry, but one final thing. I mean, just relationships with things like British Council and other government sort of or quasi sort of bodies that are supposed to have a role in cultural exchange. There's no sort of sense of any growth of identity or something in mechanisms like that.
There probably will be. However, I'm not sure that the industrial strategy will have looked at it like that.
No.
I think, coming back to the question about why they made it so difficult, I just think that the problem is something like an industrial strategy is so cross-cutting, and one of the problems is that there's been a lot of churn in central government, as always happens with a new government coming in, and that still hasn't quite settled. So they're trying to move things on and trying to do things at speed, but in doing that, they don't always look at everything. So I think that that's possibly an opportunity for us to talk to the British Council and think about those and join up at the police level. I don't see why not.
Thank you.
Cheers, thanks, Richard. And I think there was some interesting questions on there about the kind of the soft power council and what that kind of and how that intersected between British Council as well in terms of how that kind of reaches out internationally as well. I've got quite a few more questions. What do you think the impact of local government reorganisation on top of everything that you covered there wasn't enough? I mean, it's something that we keep on, because actually that was one of my questions back is I didn't see when I was kind of looking through the spending review stuff any shift in the settlements for local authorities really in terms of so it's not so because obviously that one when we did the growth inquiry stuff, one of the things that was really highlighted, wasn't it, was although there's Arts Council as kind of standstill funding, local authority funding is massively dipped for arts and culture, and that's unlikely to shift with the spending review because there's not been any really significant uplifts for anything other than sort of adult social care.
I mean the local government reorganisation is still in flux, and I very much doubt they will be able to give anybody any more money while they're still deciding what the structures will be. Now the problem with that is it just creates hiatus, and nobody will make a decision and nobody will invest because they don't know whether they'll be able to invest. There are some really fundamental issues with the local government review. As you're merging local authorities, and some local authorities in huge deficit, others are in a positive situation, and obviously they don't want to be put together. So there's an awful lot of angst in that area. Less so for us as a combined authority area, but it will be affecting everything on our periphery and what that looks like.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's the thing, you know, obviously we work across the whole of the West Midlands, and actually the West Midlands, when we look at the picture, is probably one of the most complicated in terms of devolution, because everything outside of the combined authority are mostly two-tier authorities.
Yeah.
You know, and the politics around, you know, yeah, I'm just thinking about just conversations I've had in Stoke and Staffordshire, and you know, the fact that they don't really want to merge. In terms of Stoke and North Staffordshire, but then I think Worcester, I think, Elaine, we've had a chat about, haven't we, about what that looks like as well around all. So yeah, really complicated in terms of flux, isn't it?
And I think also within that is the political churn alongside. So the fear, I think, of sort of what will merging mean for seats at the table for different parties. What will it mean for decision making? We've already seen where you've got reform-led councils. This is the sort of thing they would possibly cut because it's perceived to be for the rich. Therefore, why would we invest in it? So in the same as you've got the same problem with green and whatever have you. So I think there's an awful lot of churn that just creates uncertainty again.
I've got Rachel. I can see Rachel. I've got your hand up. Also, there was a question just in terms of Noel had put a question around the skills, loosely involved with the West Midlands Local Skills Improvement Plan, and concerned that the regional investment decisions will be predicated on the local skills improvement plan, and that might not benefit the creative and cultural sector. And what do we think? I mean, it'd be interesting to get your take, and then Rachel will just come to your question after that.
I suppose one of the problems that we've got with things like LSIPs is that because the combined authority leads it, and the combined authority has got a relatively narrow remit of part of the whole of the skills arena. So there is a natural focus on FE, adult education sort of areas. And I think one of the problems with that is that everything outside of that gets missed. So it's a particular issue for universities, for instance, because there isn't a clear plan for higher level skills, where actually in the creative cultural sectors you have a disproportionate number of people with higher level skills. They're just not paid an awful lot of money because you're meant to be doing this out of the goodness of your heart, and because it's your own personal drive around this. And I think that can then lead to these skills being missed, and I think that is a real problem. And from a sort of a reflective point of view about the future of skills, what we know is with the advent of AI and technology, it's going to be more important to be creative. It's going to be more important to have holistic skills. So the danger is that we push people down a science tech or AI or whatever stream of skills, but actually quite a lot of those skills might be displaced and replaced. So I would agree actually that I think LSIPs probably need to change because of technology and also the industrial strategy.
Rachel, Thomas.
Not really a question, actually. It was more just, I guess, an observation. And I think somebody else, I think it might be Amy, who's sort of posted something in a similar vein in the chat, which is, I'm sure I'm not the only one sitting here with quite a significant feeling of disconnect in a practical sense from what this, from this money. And I work at the rep. And so if, we're a larger organisation, and I can only sort of assume that might feel more acute if you're representing a smaller organisation, but it is that sense of disconnect from these really big figures and strategies being announced, and then the reality on the ground, and the sense of, I suppose, the sense of access to that funding, and the sense of the feeling that, oh, actually, that might make a real difference to something that we are all doing, running arts and culture organisations or being active freelancers within the arts and culture sector in the region. And I suppose it's just to articulate that. And I guess, there is a bit of a, how do we bridge that gap? Because from where I'm sitting, that it doesn't feel particularly attainable. And I suppose, some of us will have a relationship with Arts Council and some of us will have a revenue or a project funded relationship with Arts Council. But as the major funder of the arts in the country, I suspect that all of this will make absolutely no difference to a lot of people here unless it is felt in our revenue grants or it trickles into project grant funding that that means that more freelancers, more smaller companies that are not revenue funding can access funding through Arts Council. That's just my observation. Beck, it's really interesting. I love hearing about policy stuff. I just want to articulate that really profound sense of disconnect as well alongside it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with that at all, Rachel. I think it's a challenge for any government to make what the decisions they're making relevant to the people on the ground. And I think because we've got a fairly it's not dysfunctional. We've got a local authority, combined authority, etc. churn at the moment and destabilisation. Hopefully, at the end of it, it'll be much stronger and in a better position in the future, and there'll be more clarity. But I think while that happens, it does push businesses and people further away from an understanding of the business base, because you've not got the translational bit happening necessarily. And that might be something that, as a partnership within the region, we want to have a look at. And how do we pool and understand what the opportunities are?
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. And I completely agree. It's one of the things that we sort of go, actually, how do you navigate all of that? Talk to command, talk to the kind of local authorities. And what was really interesting, and I've got a couple of hands, Elaine, and I've seen some other things in the chat. Who else is somebody from? Oh, hang on. It's all right. I've got two screens. That's all. So somebody else put their hands up. One of the things that we really want to do is try and kind of unpick that. It came a lot through the growth inquiry, didn't it? Through the interviews, was we don't really know what's happening or where the investment is, where the funding is. And so I think it's certainly, there's probably a group maybe that we could sort of start to look and go, what does this look like? Amy, I just want to respond to your question around the Createx stuff. Just so you know, we sat on the steering group and we had this really strong conversation actually yesterday about how do we make sure that it is inclusive in terms of how people accept that and how do they understand that. Hayley was also from the Combined Authority was also really kind of championing that a little bit. I think also that's quite specific, and you have to remember that is specific funding for specific activity, and how do you that is about partnership R&D around innovative ideas around Createx. So it's not a revenue fund, and that's the challenge, isn't it? Is that we've got so many freelancers or micro organisations and SMEs who want to or have got got great ideas and lack of funding, but maybe don't fit into some of those bubbles. And how do you articulate where's the best chance to have your time? So yeah, completely agree. I've got John. I knew I'd seen your hand up. John, and then Elaine.
Yeah. I think just kind of coming back on this same point, Rachel and Amy, and even what David was talking about earlier, is there something around just understanding what research and innovation looks like for the culture sector? I think because the immediate thinking is like digital, AI, tech, but I think arts and humanities research is and innovation is a completely different thing. And I think there's something there of just understanding what being innovative is. I think that's my point. And I think that possibly needs to come from a kind of academic perspective as well. There is this real focus that everything's go digital, go AI, go gaming, and that's kind of where the innovation is happening. But surely there's innovation happening with community arts and the way theatre interacts with communities. And is there scope to draw on that kind of the focus on growth being more about the arts dividend, the social dividends of the work? That's my point.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, the danger actually is that when we talk about AI technology, etc., what we're really seeing is STEM moving into creative, not creative moving into STEM necessarily. So you can also end up with a sort of a world where you've got your computer scientists defining what art is, and that's one of the problems that we've got, I think. And so I think better ways to create that collaboration between, and the same goes for social sciences as well, John, you know, that social sciences, humanities, arts with science, we've never needed it more in the face of AI and what could happen. Yet there still isn't the mechanisms to create that and to understand how we can get the best out of the technology without destroying, you know, what it means to be human. And that's the problem that we're sort of facing in that area.
Thanks. Elaine, I've got your hand up. We've got about 5 minutes, just letting people know. We might not get to everything, so we'll see what we can always kind of update people afterwards. So Elaine.
Sorry, I'm going to get on my soapbox, sorry. And I know you've said it already, Eric, but, you know, kind of, there's lots of talks about cities, there's lots of talks about combined authorities. You know, Worcestershire, Herefordshire sit outside both of those in terms of rural areas. I know we have some cities in both those places. So how do we, a bit like the freelancers, how do people that sit outside of those big terminology kind of sectors in terms of, you know, where universities are, where we're not part of combined authorities, you know, rural areas where, you know, if communities don't have some level of input into what's happening, you know, it just feels like all of that is just being completely missed out, and it's all focusing on where the big, you know, cities are and the big organizations are, and we're just going to create 2 tiers worth of culture if we're not careful. And, you know, all of the work around Let's Create, which is around community co-creation, where does all of that fit into any of these conversations? Because it just feels like it's completely and utterly separate at the moment from, you know, the headlines that we've got. I know we're talking headlines then, you know, rather than detail, but that's kind of what it feels like to me from someone who is quite passionate about making sure people in rural areas also have access to culture and have an input into what their culture looks like.
I mean, in terms of particularly the LPIF funding, there is the opportunity that if we galvanise the region and the rest of the Midlands actually outside of the combined authority areas, that there is a pot of money that we can access. It is competitive, but I think it's an opportunity there that actually places will need to galvanise themselves, and I think there is a role for the universities, for the combined authority, and for organisations that do sit in that central area to be thinking about the relationship and how we can support those places outside to bid for those money and collaborate, especially for universities where there may not be a university in those areas. How do we work with those places to help them access innovation funding like this to press on with the work that's already in existence? And that is a key thing of that call.
Thanks. And I think that sounds like something maybe we could pick up back around sort of how do we support the convening of some of that activity alongside the university and the universities that exist in the different places across, because, you know, there is some big ones in the combined, but also outside, hey?
Yeah, there is, but they're probably less cited on the funding because the focus has been on the combined authority money than it has the fund that will be available outside that.
Yeah. Just quickly looking at different places, and just to flag, I have actually been chatting to Claire McColgan in Liverpool, just to find out how that's been working in terms of, because they've retained cultural funding through a range of different challenges, but also within a combined authority, very different than the West Midlands in terms of scale, scope, and all of the rest of it. But there is trying to have some interesting conversations around what the learning can be around how we continue to advocate for that and make the case for some of those things. And also just want to flag, Beck, I don't know if you noticed so actually one of the recommendations we think from the Growth Company has sort of been taken on in terms of the industrial strategy. So there is creative place groups now, which is what we suggested, which was this higher level sort of collaboration across different government departments, including the sector and local authorities, and to be able to think about place a bit more joined up, hopefully. So we'll see whether how that comes off, hey? But we were pleased to see that maybe some of that work that we're doing around kind of making recommendations and drip feeding does actually get through a little bit. It feels like this is a conversation to carry on, actually, rather than just sort of finish today. I mean, I think, Bex, thank you so much. So insightful, so really good to have your knowledge and expertise, and certainly in those conversations that you're having. But it feels like that this is a conversation to think about how we access that, how we understand what's happening and what the actual impact is on the sector more broadly across all of those devolution agendas, across the government funding. And I suppose we'll find out a little bit more in October, hey, when there's an actual budget. Am I right in the timescales for that?
It's usually November. It's beginning of November, but COVID messed the dates up and they've never quite settled back down again.
But and because that's it, that, like you say, as all of these things, and I can't imagine the amount of times that we sat on these calls, Bex, and like the devil's in the detail. And we'll find out when all of that happens, and we will do our best at Culture Central and with partners and all of you to try and demystify as much as possible so we can make the most of it here in the region. So thank you for your time. Everyone's dropping off. Really appreciate it.
Bye.